let's start with PSG-Bayern, which is probably the headline tie of at least the first week. At least the first week, but maybe actually when you come to look at it, of all of these games, these are the two teams I think you look at and you go, okay, of all the sides in it, these are probably two of the favorites. Obviously, in kind of terms of the way that these two sides are set up, the players who play for them, the pedigree that lives within them, but also I think in terms of form, whilst they're not both absolutely flying, they feel like they're in better nick than some of the other big guns that we'll come to discuss a little bit later.
Yeah, totally. Look, these two always seem to play each other, don't they? Like it always seems that the Bayern and PSG come up against each other. I think it's 4 in the last 6 seasons they actually have come up against each other. So that's why it feels like that. Obviously, they've played in the Champions League final too. I feel a little bit for Bayern Munich. I mean, they had a perfect group. They were in a group with Inter Milan, Barcelona, and Victoria Plzen, and they got 18 points out of 18. It couldn't have gone any better. They conceded 2 goals. Their reward for that is to play PSG, who absolutely messed up their qualifying campaign and came second to Benfica. And now here we are. We've got possibly the clash of the round on our hands. And so, yeah, absolutely no glory to come of that brilliant run from Bayern Munich. But what we have got is the glory of one of the games of the round for sure, because these are usually among the favourites when you set out at the beginning of a season. And, well, it's tough to kind of grasp exactly who is favourites here. I'll get into the reasons in a minute, but I think personally it'll be Bayern. But what do you think? How are you going to head into this game? Where's your head at?
Well, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because Bayern have just come through a slightly weird run in terms of the league. Obviously, they went back to winning ways in both the DFB Pokal against Mainz and then that game in the Bundesliga against Wolfsburg at the weekend. But before that, if I'm not mistaken, it was 3 1-all draws in a row since coming back from the Bundesliga's extended winter break. They drew to Leipzig in the first game back for the Bundesliga. Then they drew to Cologne at home, and then they drew to Eintracht Frankfurt. And that's fine in terms of Leipzig and Frankfurt both look like very good sides who we'll both come on to discuss later on in this podcast. But hang on, you look at the table and you go, oh, hang on, Bayern's lead has been whittled right down again to a point at the top of the Bundesliga. Now, they've obviously signed Joao Cancelo, Daley Blind in this transfer window, and you're going, well, they've done another load of good business just to kind of see themselves over the line in many ways. But you take this kind of side and you think, if you're dropping points in these games in the Bundesliga, are they quite as cohesive under Nagelsmann as maybe they have been in previous seasons? And perhaps the answer is no, but then you go to PSG and fine, they've extended their lead at the top of Liga to 8 points now, but it's not been plain sailing for them either since they came back from the international break. And there's been a bit of chopping and changing for Christophe Galtier. The fact that they've switched between this kind of 3 at the back and 4 at the back system. We've had a couple of games where you're looking at the results and you're thinking, that probably shouldn't be happening. It's the 1-0 reverse to Rennes, the 1-1 draw with Stade Reims, who, to be fair, are on an absolute tear under Will Still. But you look at these and you go, maybe they're not quite as cohesive, and maybe we're making the same argument as they have been in recent years and in recent times. And I think just we're at a point where both of these sides don't maybe feel as infallible as they have done in PSG's case at the start of this season, where they felt absolutely wonderful. I mean, that loss to Rennes was their first league domestic loss of the season. Or Bayern, I would say, in recent years, in more kind of cohesive Bayern sides, and perhaps when Robert Lewandowski was leading that line. And it leads to a really, really interesting. I probably would shade PSG.
Well, look, I think first of all, we have to set out the fact both of these teams are actually top of the league at the moment. And that's not really the case, as you say, at the top of this. Like most teams, like coming into this last 16, aren't actually in great form and stuff. But PSG are top of Liga. And as we record this, Bayern Munich are top of the Bundesliga. So like they are both in actually quite a good place as they come into the game. Watching PSG at the weekend, they beat Toulouse 2-1. And Mbappe's injured at the moment, so Mbappe's not around. He's got an injury. Looks like he's missing a couple more weeks as well. Like watching that game, the commentary said he's out for 3 weeks, and that means you're going to miss the first leg of this game. By the way, also, everyone just remember this is a 2-legged affair, so all these games are over 2 legs, home and away. Neymar missing 2, groin problem. Verratti was out of that game with a suspension, but Ramos was missing as well. Renato Sanchez got injured in that game, so he came out. So they've got problems. Now, the one thing I would say is Messi was good. Messi was very, very good at the weekend. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's really, really good. He's a number 10, and he kind of floats around. Good player.
Won the champion. Won the World Cup, I hear.
Yeah, that's the lad. But yeah, he was like literally walking around as he does, but he scored a good goal, and some of the stuff he was doing in that match were peak Messi. It was actually quite nice to see him playing like it actually. But because of those like injuries, and if they're still going to be there for a game like this, a little bit concerned for PSG, because I feel like being at home in the first leg is something they need to take advantage of. And I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to. I think Bayern will quite like this setup of going to the Parc des Princes first and just coming out of there alive and then winning it in the second leg. They've got that pedigree too. You know, PSG constantly like, will they ever win it? Will they ever win it? Bayern don't really have that kind of pressure. That's really where my hunch comes from here. The only major flaw or concern I think I'd have with Bayern, which you don't have so much with PSG, is like, where's your actual goals coming from? Like, since Lewandowski's gone, you don't have that obvious goal source that you would have had in previous years, like Thomas Muller still being looked too heavily. So that's probably where my main concern would come from.
I just think, you look at Nagelsmann's Bayern in Europe, and they've stormed through the group stages, right, in the last 2 years in tricky groups. And they've gone, right, we're going to do this. They've come into the last 16. Now, last year, they had RB Salzburg in the last 16, and they drew the first leg 1-1. And if you call back to that game, they actually probably should have lost it. Now, the second leg, they won 7-1 at home, right? So this wasn't going to be an issue. But then the second, they go to the quarterfinal and they come up against Villarreal. And whilst Villarreal under Unai Emery were a good side, a very good side, it was a game that Bayern would have been expected to win. They lost the first leg 1-0 away from home, and they brought it back to Munich. And you're thinking, okay, Bayern are probably going to do this. And then they don't, right? They fall apart, and Villarreal get that late goal as Bayern are pushing to not send the game into extra time. Villarreal strike, and it goes, and Bayern are out. And I just have this funny feeling that in Europe, maybe the Nagelsmann effect hasn't quite worked in the knockout stages in the way that it has in domestic competition. And that's maybe why I'd edge to PSG. Now, they have their own problems in terms of formation changes and where they actually sit in terms of what is the best way for PSG to line up. I think they're best with a 3 at the back. I think that's the formation which has seen them in most control over the course of this season. But Galtier at the moment is experimenting, partly due to injuries, as you say. Sergio Ramos up, Presnel Kimpembe has been out for long periods as well. But the injuries don't worry me all that much. I mean, you look at the Mbappe one, of course, there's a massive blow. It's always going to be a massive blow when someone of the quality of Kylian Mbappe is out. But the midfield injuries, the way that they can drift in and bring in Vitinha, Fabian Ruiz, who's finally starting to show his quality in a PSG shirt, Carlos Soler, who we know has the capacity to perform in these big European ties. I just got a funny feeling that PSG edged this, and that's where my hunch is coming from.
Well, they need to, because it'll be a disaster if they're out this early. The whole point they keep changing managers because you're supposed to go and win the Champions League. So, yeah, it could be another an axe wielded. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to be one of the games of the round. But I don't know. I'm going Bayern.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going PSG. I'm sure we'll come back to these in part 3 when we're talking about our favourites for the actual competition as a whole. But for now, let's move on to the other game that night, which is AC
By the way, would
Milan.
that be your number 1 ranked tie of the round? Because it would be mine.
It depends how you look at it. in terms of like, are these the two
One
teams
that you pick
in
that
the
you can't
best
miss. If you
form?
could only watch one game of this last 16, is that the one you'd pick?
It's obviously the proper choice, but I'd probably go Frankfurt Napoli. So
Such
so
me.
then this is me. So welcome to my world. Right, from two teams who are top of their league and flying to two teams who are really not and who have been in some trouble in recent weeks. AC Milan versus Tottenham. Now, if you pick this tie when it was drawn, Dean, Milan look like comfortable favourites. It's fair to say that they don't anymore.
I mean, since the World Cup, they are one of the worst teams I've seen. Them and Liverpool will be right down there. Yeah, complete mess. Terrible results. The structure. We talking on Patreon on Monday about what Pioli was doing against Inter Milan. In case you don't know, they lost a Milan derby at the weekend. They've had a couple of stuffings in the weeks before that too. Confidence on the floor. He's leaving Rafael Leao on the bench. He's overthinking things, it seems. And his job is actually being talked about as being in danger now. So that is absolutely not the case from when this draw was made, like you say. And yeah, I would have 100% said at that point that I would have fancied AC Milan. Not the case anymore. Really not the case anymore. While Tottenham still have some work to do to convince us all that they are turning a corner, it does actually look like they're turning a corner. Okay, it doesn't help that Antonio Conte has obviously had to undergo surgery and he's got to, make sure he's healthy at the moment as well as being able to help lead this team. And I'm sure, in an environment like the San Siro, maybe he would have loved to be back in there masterminding a big win against AC Milan, as you would have done in previous years of management. But for Tottenham here, I feel like they've got a bit of structure now about them, a bit more confidence. They've made good signings. Harry Kane is in great form. They've got players on the up, whereas I feel like all of Milan's players are currently falling off a cliff. They might actually be running out of the club soon. They seem like they're in absolute disarray. Really is a strange situation here, and this is an intriguing game for very different reasons to that Bayern PSG one that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if Antonio Conte is going to be back on the bench for this one. Obviously, we wish him all the best and we wish him a speedy recovery from his surgery. But Christian Stellini, who's Conte's right-hand man, has an absolutely unbelievable record when he's been in charge of Tottenham games. I think he might be perfect, or if not perfect, he's very close to it. When he steps up in Conte's absence, Tottenham have undoubtedly done well. And that result against Manchester City at the weekend is, just the latest in a line of very impressive performances. As you say, Spurs feel, if not brilliant, at least settled. And I think that's important here to look at, in that you look at the front three of Kulusevski, Son, and Kane at the moment, and it feels since Kulusevski come back, they've really reignited as a trio. The midfield duo of Højbjerg and Bentancur is absolutely up there with the best in Europe, I think. And at the back, they just feel a little bit calmer than they have done. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Tottenham are favourites of the Champions League or even among the favourites, because I think there are too many weaknesses still within this side against teams with higher kind of firepower and who will be able to take advantage of those defensive lapses. But all things considered, I think you'd be hard pressed to suggest that Tottenham are not favourites for this game against AC Milan. And this, actually, DJ, is one of the things I'm interested in terms of, obviously, we're recording a week beforehand. The managerial situation could well be different at AC Milan by the time that this game comes around. That's how toxic it feels right now under Stefano Pioli. And we're only, 8 months on from them winning their first Scudetto in a decade. It's all just fallen apart.
Yeah, look, just to kind of put into context too, like where we're at here with Milan, so they were in Chelsea's group, Group E in the group. And I was actually really excited about Milan playing against Chelsea. I thought that they were going to really give them a good game. And Chelsea obviously having a bad season. Chelsea beat Milan 3-0 at home and they beat Milan 2-0 away. Chelsea are not as good at the moment as Tottenham are. So there's that to take into context. And then if you actually look at the results so far, like I was just referring to, like Milan's recent form, I just had to get it up to make sure I was not doing them any disservice. And I'm really not. Like, it's been really bad. So start of Jan, they played in the Coppa Italia round of 16. They lost 1-0 at home to Torino. Since then, they've lost the Super Coppa Italiana final. They lost 3-0 to Inter. Since that game, they lost 4-0 to Lazio. They lost 5-2 to Sassuolo, and then they lost 1-0 to Inter at the weekend. And to be honest, that should have been more than one. And now they've got Torino at the weekend before they host Tottenham. I mean, a lot has to change in that Torino game for me to have any faith in Milan turning this around. I think Tottenham will be so happy that this has happened to them, because this is a fantastic opportunity for Tottenham to kind of jump on and make the most of. So, yeah, it's really difficult to have much optimism around Milan right now. I just can't believe we're in this situation.
Yeah, me neither. But it looks like a tie that Tottenham would have dreaded at the time, and maybe won't be dreading quite so much at this point. Obviously, also, if Conte is back, he is a man who has managed both Inter and Juventus. You'd imagine he's not going to get the warmest of welcomes at San Siro. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe for more from us at Ranks FC.